Hi there. I wanted to talk a little bit about how IBS is typically diagnosed and why it's diagnosed that way. It's a little bit windy, so hopefully you guys can hear me okay. It's a disorder. It's not a disease, and it is typically diagnosed by basically ruling out other diseases. So it's by excluding other diseases as possible issues. So generally, irritable bowel syndrome doesn't really manifest with evidence via lab tests or diagnostics, right? So it's not really going to show up on your lab work necessarily. It's not going to necessarily show up, at least not in the routine labs that can be run. It's not going to show up on a CT scan or an x-ray or that kind of thing. Typically, I mean, there's clues that doctors can get that it might be IBS, but there's nothing necessarily visually wrong. Whereas like with other kinds of diseases, you might have something in your labs that's off the charts, and that would be a real indicator of something else going on. So it is important to make sure that you're really dealing with IBS and not something else. Because if it's something else, there might be other avenues or other pathways available to you. So it is important to get a diagnosis if you're able to. Now, that isn't something that was easy for me. I've had a really hard time truly getting diagnosed, and here's why. So, and remember, I've been at this for 20 years. So I did have a doctor about, 3-4 years ago now, finally say, yep, it's IBS. And that was really all I got from him, and he's now retired. He's no longer in the business. And he based that on a colonoscopy where there wasn't really any evidence of anything wrong. So that was about as far as he went with his testing. And that was okay, because at that point I had pretty much decided that's what I had too, based on my many years of experience and all the reading I had done, and my own process of ruling out other illnesses and possible diseases to the best of my ability. For example, celiac. I didn't seem to have the issues with gluten that a person with celiac disease might have. And with Crohn's, I didn't seem to have any of the significant symptoms that a person with Crohn's might have. So that was my own judgment. Again, I'm not a medical professional, but that was kind of where my gut was telling me that that I was IBS. So why I can't seem to get a definitive diagnosis is that I had, since that diagnosis, quote unquote diagnosis, I had my terrible flare-up that led me to discovering what worked for me. But in the midst of that, I did go back to seek medical care from Western medicine, hopefully looking for a diagnosis, and also hoping to find out if there was something else going on, something seriously wrong, because I had some really alarming symptoms that I've talked about in a couple previous videos. So here's where things kind of get dicey for me. The testing that I had to do in order to rule out the other diseases was so incredibly uncomfortable and painful and hard for me with my overly sensitive intestines that I had to make a judgment call of how many times was I going to put basically my intestines through hell to come up with yet another lab that said, nope, we didn't find anything. Nope, we didn't do anything. So I had, I'm sorry, it's windy. Hopefully you guys not blowing on the mic. I had blood work. I had stool samples. I had an x-ray. Then I had a CT scan. Then I had an MRI. I had my doctor tell me to just go take a laxative to rule out constipation, even though all things in my experience pointed to the exact opposite of constipation. And then the next step would have been yet another colonoscopy. And at that point I said enough, because even just the laxative put me into a tailspin. For 2 full weeks I was in hell on this cycle of not being able to calm my poor peristalsis, that movement of the intestines, of things through the intestines. It was just awful. So that was my experience. I stopped. I just put the brakes on. I'm going about things in a little bit of a different way. I'm not suggesting that you should. I'm just saying sometimes getting that IBS diagnosis can be tough because of all the things you have to go through in order to rule out everything else. So hang in there. Do what you need to do. Don't put yourself at risk. If there's something really alarming going on, make sure you talk to a professional. Make sure you talk to somebody that you trust, that you think knows what's really going on with gastro health. But you also get to have a voice with your own healthcare. You get to have a voice in what the next steps are for you, and if it's a good fit for you, and does it fit into your life right then. Like, if I had signed up for yet another colonoscopy or something that forced me to radically empty out my digestive system with laxatives and chemicals and that kind of thing, I would have missed a ton of work, because it just takes such a toll on so many people with IBS versus a normal patient, a patient that maybe wouldn't have such a radical reaction. And I'm not so sure that my practitioner was mindful of the impact of what she was asking of me, or what she was, she can just quickly order just yet the next test in the process without really truly considering what it means for the quality of my life. And it sounds like I'm so down on the medical profession, but I think we have to have a voice in it. It's not that I'm down, it's that we've got to take a stand. We've got to take responsibility for what we choose to have done to us, and to be informed, to be a responsible patient. You have a voice. Basically, your medical professionals work for you. They work for you. So be informed. Do your research. Come in armed with your questions and your symptoms and your lists of things that have been going on, and just be ready to have a conversation. And if your doctor doesn't seem like they want to have a conversation, or whomever, it might not be a doctor, maybe it's somebody else that you're seeing, if they're not ready to have this conversation and go through these things with you, then maybe it's not the right fit for you. Maybe there's somebody else, and I'm still seeking the right fit. But I'm also doing really good, so I've kind of chilled out on that. But mostly, I just think it's important to feel empowered throughout this kind of thing, because you can just feel like you're getting run through the gamut and sent here for testing, sent there for testing, and yet another this and yet another that, and it can be really tough. So you have to do what's right for you. And if getting down to the core of it and the answers are most important to you, and getting that diagnosis, and you're willing to walk through hell for it, then go do it. Absolutely. And if you just feel like, I cannot take another test, I can't take another bowel cleanse, then you have a right to make those choices, for sure. So hang in there.